So let's take a look at how we can create an illustration style using Adobe Illustrator. The benefits of using Illustrator are going to be that it is independent of resolution, and we have a lot of control that we wouldn't have normally if we were creating something based on, say, something like a Photoshop file. Photoshop, we're going to be very dependent on resolution. If we create a file and somebody wants it bigger, you're kind of out of luck. You need to really start over again at the resolution that someone wants. So what I like about Illustrator is that once you come up with a plan and a style, things can work really nicely together. I like to base my stuff on how a watercolor would work. And if you're not familiar with watercolors, they have a lot of layers. And as you layer those things in, there are going to be areas that are going to get darker and darker. One of the nice things about doing layering with Illustrator is that we can get lighter and lighter at the same time. So let's take a look at how we can try some of these things. So what I'd like to do is take a look at how I've set up this file. Let's take a look at the whole thing. Okay, so here's a file where we've got a photo, and I've gradually built upon this. Okay, so probably the first thing I worked with was the face. And the nice thing about Illustrator is if you want to put in a base where we're catching this nice hair light that's behind David Bowie, you can reorder that at any point, so you don't really need to create them in the order that they're going to appear. Okay, so even the background is kind of an afterthought. So the way I had probably created this was to come up with David's body more than anything else, and then probably added in some of these other things. Okay, so as we do this, you need to think about how you're going to layer stuff. Not so much that it's going to affect, how you're creating it, because like I said, you can reorder these layers. But one of the things that I love to do, if we zoom in here, maybe this will make it a little bit more obvious, because transparency is all about what I'm doing here. So here we can select different objects within the face, okay? And if we were to look at a gradient menu, we can see, why is this not showing up as a gradient? Oh, there we go. You need to have your foreground color, right? Okay, so here we're going to see what's going on as our gradients. Let's get back to this. There we go. So here we go. So now you can see that this is a gradient built, and it's gradually going to a very dark. Anytime you see this dark here, this means it's probably been used as a screen, because screen, as you know, is going to fade out as you get to a dark. And we can use the same thing when we go to create a shadow, where maybe it's going to fade into a white. Okay, so if we look at our appearance menu, we can see that this shape was used as a screen. Okay, here's a shape that was probably used as a multiply. There we go. Okay, so a lot of this is depending on how I'm using it, but they're the same gradients used over and over and over again in this file. So once I have a palette of gradients that are working, things are pretty much set up. I like to just kind of keep working and trying to find different opacities. So here we see a 70% screen. Here's a 100% multiply. Okay. Up here, what have we got in the hairline? So this, we're seeing a radial gradient. Okay. I don't know if you can see that, but it's definitely coming across where it's lighter in the middle and darker coming out on the edge. So let's take a look at how we can probably blend some of these things before we get too far into this. All right. So I have this new layer here with nothing in it, and I'm going to create a series of rectangles. By holding down the Control key, doesn't matter what tool I have selected in the tool palette, it will give me a cursor. So I'm going to select this, and let's come down here and use the eyedropper tool to take a look at what that is. So here we've got 100% multiply. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control again. I'm going to grab this square, and I know that this is probably a screen because it's coming off much brighter, right? So there we go. So that's a 70% screen. And let's try one more shape here. And let's see. How's that one working? That's a 32% multiply. Probably something that I've already used. Let's try one over here. Probably use that one as well. Okay, so maybe I want to grab something with one of these browner colors. All right, so we can see these a little bit easier. Let's copy these to another Adobe Illustrator file. So I'm going to hold down Shift. Actually, let's grab our selection tool. Now I'm holding down Shift to select multiple objects at once. There we go. Thank you, computer. So now I'm going to hit Control X because I don't really need these on there. And I have created a new file. You'll notice that this is in RGB mode, so let's get that to the same thing. So I'm going to come up here under Edit, and actually File, Color Mode. We're going to change this to RGB. So you're probably familiar with CMYK is better for print, and RGB is better for some multimedia things, and you have a much wider gamut of colors. You'll also notice that I have Paste Remembers Layers. So this is kind of a cool thing. Paste Remembers Layers means that when I copy that out of here, the layer that's called Face, it will also be called Face in here. Okay? So it's just a nice way to work between two files so that if you have a layer name working for you, everything's good. So let's take a look and see how these colors interact now. So here, if I overlay some of these colors, I get what I like to refer to as a wash. Okay, the wash is a term that I picked up from watercolor painting, and you'll notice that we're able to see things underneath here. So let's say this is my screen, okay, and if I look at that gradient in my gradient window, let's grab that. It's over here. Okay, you'll notice that I have a black. Okay, so for the screen, this color here is probably about as bright as we're going to get. Or let's see, how is this going to work? We can take our gradient tool and we can. Okay, so there we go. Now we're seeing it. So you have a gradient palette over here. You have a gradient tool over here. With the gradient palette, you're going to be able to adjust things like this. Okay, and you can see how everything's created. I'm going to undo that because I don't want to mess too much with my gradient there. But you can see how things are going to be able to be changed. All right. So once I have these colors, I picked the colors because they work well with what I've got going in the David Bowie photo. Okay, there's a lot of purples I saw. So here, if I click up, you'll notice that up here at this dark end, it is a 70% screen. So here we're getting a lot of the bright end and not a whole lot of the dark end. So let's take a look at down here. And here, not only have I got a dark color for my, what is this? This should be, looks like it's just a straight up blend. There's no opacity control applied to this. So here we've got a 50% opacity on my lighter end and a much darker end going there. All right. And then if we look at this color, we can see that this is 100% multiply. So there's a lot of controls that we can have in the gradient menu. We can set the opacity down to 0 if we wanted, and look how it changes things over here. Okay, so this all starts to work together once we start creating shapes and doing some blending. So let's go back to our David Bowie here, and we can take a look and see how maybe some of these things are actually starting to pull together. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I think 10 minutes is plenty long enough for a video, and then the next video I want to show you how posterization might help us to define some of these shapes. Okay.